Hi friends, today we are going to discussing about drug transport mechanisms. What is drug transport? Here the drug transport is a process of the drug transport is a process of movement of drug across the biological membrane. So here the drug transport is a process of movement of the drug across the biological membrane. So after administration of drug in oral route, first it undergoes the disintegration, dissolution and converting into a solution form. Now the drug in a dissolved form, it has to cross the membrane, GI membrane, and enters into the systemic circulation. So a permeation of the drug across the membrane is known as drug transport. Basically the drug transport will takes place by the drug transport takes place by three basic mechanisms. The drug transport will takes place by three basic mechanisms. Those are the first one is a transcellular transport. Second one is paracellular transport. Third one is vesicular transport. Here the drug transport is a process of movement of the drug across the biological membrane. So process of movement of drug across the biological membrane is known as drug transport. And drug transport will takes place by three basic mechanisms. Those are transcellular transport, paracellular transport, vesicular transport. Transcellular transport means the passage of the drug through the cells. The passage of the drug across the cells, across the epithelial cells, is known as transcellular transport. Whereas paracellular transport means the passage of the drug in between the cells. Is known as the paracellular transport. Whereas the passage of the drug in vesicle form by endocytosis, that means by engulfing mechanism, is known as vesicular transport. So to understand the drug transport mechanism, let us consider the biological membrane. So here we know that the biological membrane have it is composed of number of epithelial cells. So the biological membrane is composed of number of epithelial cells. These epithelial cells are bind to each other, connected to with each other, and forms a tight junction. So here there is a tight junction. So this total, it is known as biological membrane. The biological membrane is composed of epithelial cells. And these are tightly bound together and forms the tight junction. And the upper side of the cells, that means the membrane side, it is known as a GI side, gastrointestinal side, it is known as apical site, or it is also known as mucosal site. apical site or mucosal site. Whereas other side of the membrane, other side of the cells, it is known as basolateral size. Basolateral site, or it is known as blood site, where we can see the blood capillaries. Blood capillaries. So always the drug has to pass or permeated through these epithelial cells and enters into the cytosol, passage across the cytosol and again permeated through the basolateral membrane, and now it is enters into the blood capillaries. Through the blood it is reaching to the various organs and showing its pharmacological action. So here the drug transport, if you see the first one, drug transport, transcellular transport, the passage of the drug across the cells, the passage of the drug across the cells, that means through the cells, it is known as the transcellular transport. The passage of the drug through the cells, it is known as transcellular transport mostly. Whereas the passage of the drug in between the cells, the space in between the cells, if the drug is permeated, so that mechanism is known as paracellular. The passage of the drug in between the cells is known as paracellular transport. Whereas if the drug is engulfed by the epithelial cells and forms a vesicle, and now this vesicle are transported across the cytosol and releases the drug into the blood capillaries, that mechanism is known as vesicular transport or endocytosis. Vesicular transport, or it is also known as endocytosis. So these are the three transport mechanisms. So if you see the first one, transcellular transport, the passage of the drug across the cells or through the cells is known as transcellular transport, and it is the major pathway. It is major pathway for drug absorption, major pathway, and most common pathway. It is a most common pathway, and 90% of the drugs are absorbed by this route. So the transcellular transport is the major mechanism for drug absorption. 90% of the drugs are absorbed by this transcellular transport, that means the permeation through the cells. And here mostly the drugs which are in lipophilic in nature, lipophilic drugs are easily permeated through these transcellular transport. So lipophilic drugs are absorbed by the transcellular mechanism. And here the transcellular transport involves the three basic steps. Steps in transcellular transport are, it consists of three steps. One is the permeation through the apical site of the membrane. So permeation through the membrane which is present at apical site, and again the passage across the cytosol and again permeated through the basolateral site. Now it is enters into the blood. So here three basic steps in transcellular transporter. The first one is permeation of drug, permeation through epithelial membrane, epithelial membrane. Second step is passage of the drug, across the cytosol, and the third step is permeation of the drug through basolateral membrane, membrane and enters into blood circulation. So these are the three basic steps in drug transport. So here a permeation through the epithelial membrane, that is apical side, it is a major obstruction in case of drug absorption. It is the major rate limiting step for hydrophilic drugs. And here the transcellular transport can be occurred by different processes. So the processes where transcellular transports is divided into number of processes. Those are broadly they are divided into two types. One is passive transcellular transport, and the second one is active transport. So the name itself indicates passive transport means there is no energy involvement. There is no energy involvement. So the transport of the drug across the membrane, it does not require any energy, means that process is known as passive transport. Mostly the passive transport involves different processes like passive diffusion, port transport, ion pair transport, and facilitated or carrier mediated transport. These four will comes under passive transport. Whereas active transport means there is an involvement of energy. So if there is a direct involvement of energy in the form of ATP, it is known as primary transport. So if ATP is directly involved, it is known as primary active transport. If in the form of if there is no direct involvement of ATP, the ATP which is involved in the ion transport is same ATP if it is involved in the drug transport, it is known as secondary transport. So if the ion as well as the drug both are transported in same way, it is known as a symport. If ion and the drug will be transported in opposite ways, that is known as antiport. Those things we will see later in case of drug absorption mechanisms. So basically here the transcellular transport will occurs by the different processes, mainly classified into two types: passive transport and active transport. The passive transport means the transport of the drug does not involve any energy, it is known as passive transport. If there is an involvement of energy, it is known as active transport. If ATP is involved directly, it is known as primary active transport. If indirect involvement of ATP, it is known as secondary active transport. So this is about transcellular transport. We will see the next thing, that is a paracellular transport. The transport of the drug between the cells is known as second paracellular transport. In case of paracellular transport, it is a minor pathway. And mostly the aqueous drugs are absorbed by this route, and are inorganic molecules and small organic molecules like urea are transported by this route. So here paracellular transport means the transport of the drug in between the cells is known as paracellular transport. It is mostly a minor pathway, and mostly aqueous and inorganic small organic molecules are absorbed by this route, this transport mechanism. And the next one is vesicular transport or endocytosis. It is also known as endocytosis, that means engulfing mechanism. So here the large molecular weight compounds are absorbed by this route. large molecular weight compounds are absorbed by this route, and here the drug will be engulfed by the cells and forms the vesicle and transported across the cytosol and released into the blood capillaries is known as vesicular transport. So here mostly large molecular weight compounds are transported by this route. It is again divided into two types. One is the phagocytosis and the second one is pinocytosis. Phagocytosis means if the drug is present in solid form, if the solid drug is absorbed by the vesicular form, it is known as a phagocytosis. Whereas if the drug is present in liquid form or solution form, liquid or solution form of the drug, liquid or solution form of the drug will be absorbed by endocytosis process, it is known as pinocytosis. Simply phagocytosis is nothing but cell eating, whereas pinocytosis is nothing but cell drinking. And here the paracellular, similarly the paracellular transport is also divided into two types. One is permeation, second one is perception. So if permeation means, so permeation of the drug through the aqueous pores which are present in the cell membrane. If the drug is transported by aqueous pores which are present in the cell membrane is known as permeation. Whereas the perception means the permeation of the drug through the small openings which are formed by the shedding of the epithelial cells, temporary openings. So here perception means, so absorption of the drug through the temporary openings which are formed by the shedding of the cells. So this is about the drug transport mechanisms. So today we discussed about drug transport mechanisms. Here the drug transport means the permeation of the drug across the membrane, across the biological membrane is known as the drug transport. And here the drug transport basically takes place by three basic mechanisms: transcellular, paracellular, vesicular. Transcellular means the movement of the drug through the cells, whereas paracellular means the transport of the drug in between the cells, whereas vesicular means if the drug is engulfed by the cells and forms a vesicle and it is transported across the cells, it is known as vesicular transport. So this is the drug transport mechanisms, and thank you one and all.